Speedpaint Storytime presents Space Murderer. Narration and artwork by Jerk Douglas, music by Pretzel. There he was, sitting at the end of the station cafeteria, facing away from everyone, eating a ration pack number 234, dried eggs and powdered sausage. Everybody knew who he was. He was the Space Murderer. Next to me was Calvin. He was a constable for the mining platform. He could handle a couple of miners going at it and tell all the wives back home that their husbands had spaced themselves after contracting lunar dementia. But he wasn't ready for this. He kept looking over. His face was pale. He kept thumbing his beam gun. One shot at full power would turn any crook into ashes. But he knew. He knew that the Space Murderer knew. If Calvin went for that gun, he'd not only be dead, but he'd be dead and spread all over the place, all in an instant. The cleaning staff would have their hands full for a week. They say the Space Murderer had murdered 600 people, all in space. They say he didn't murder on Earth. That's why they called him the Space Murderer. We were in space. We all qualified for getting murdered. We tread carefully. Nobody knew his name. Nobody knew what he looked like. His helmet was off right now while he ate, but nobody dared try to get around him and sneak a peek, because he'd get murdered. I hope you're writing all this down. The government had about 100 different bounties on the guy because he wouldn't stop murdering. They keep piling more money onto the bounty. The best and brightest used to bite, but not anymore. They only get one chance. Then they get murdered. In space. I hear he took a guy from Earth and flew him out into space just to murder him. That's the Space Murderer for you. Really, I gotta respect the guy, because he's got a code. Even if that code is space murdering, well, I gotta respect him for that. Did the Space Murderer murder kids? I don't know. Nobody knows. They say the Space Murderer doesn't leave enough of a body to identify properly. Hell, they could have all been kids. But probably not, because they don't call him the Space Child Murderer. I figure the distinction in the nomenclature would be warranted if he murdered kids. Still, this guy was a real puzzle. Everyone in the cafeteria had to be thinking what I was thinking. Who was gonna get murdered? There's no reason for him to show up on a dark side lunar mining base, not unless someone paid for someone else to get murdered. In space. We couldn't hate the Space Murderer, though. He'd murder us. Instead, we hated the guy who paid to bring him here. But who was buying the farm? Was it Bob? He vented our supply of fresh porno mags last week as some kind of sick joke. He definitely deserved it. Maybe it was Mickey. Mickey wouldn't stop farting. All the recirculated air in the station kind of smells like him now. After a while, I could see how someone would be driven to hire the Space Murderer. Hell, give me a week and I'd do it myself. It couldn't be me. I'm a great guy. I got kids and a wife, and I always say please and thank you. Tempers on the station run kinda hot, you see, so you gotta say please and thank you. We started saying please and thank you at the end of every sentence, just in case. Someone tapped me on the shoulder. Hey, is that the Space Murderer? Please, thank you. It was Bill. Bill was a good guy like me. Always said please and thank you. Always washed his hands. I think so, please, thank you, I said to him. Just because the Space Murderer was here didn't mean we couldn't be civil. In fact, it's extra incentive. Maybe he'll appreciate our courtesy. Bill's face turned white as a sheet full of ghosts, and he quickly left so he wouldn't get murdered. He was a real thinker, that Bill. Not sure why I wasn't on my way out the door as well. Morbid curiosity, I suppose. The Space Murderer finished his meal and reattached his helmet. He was discolored and worn to the point where it obscured his face entirely. He stood up and turned around. He had left his dirty dishes on the table, but who was going to tell him to clean up after himself? We're only a civilized society, after all. Please pick up your dishes, please, thank you, some idiot behind me said. Oh man, was it Buck? Buck was a real piece of work. He'd shoot his mouth off to a giant three-horned Jovian lungworm, and that's just a ridiculous premise because they don't have ears and they'll eat you. Everyone turned around. It wasn't Buck. It was Jerry. Oh, Jerry. Jerry just got here. He was a fresh-faced kid, eager to put a few credits in his money bucket. I hear he was saving up for a wedding to a pretty young gal he had Earthside. When he showed up, we razzed him about courtesy and table manners and when to hold the door open for others. I think he caught on a little too hard. Everyone turned around and stared at him with a range of expressions ranging from exasperation to downright pleading. I gave him one somewhere in the middle. He didn't know about the space murderer. He didn't know what was going on. He looked at us and then back at the space murderer and then to the dirty dishes.
"What is it, guys? Please, thank you,"
he said. Everyone was too terrified to tell him he screwed the pooch. I looked back to the space murderer, who stood staring at the room. Couldn't tell if he was looking at the kid or not. His helmet was too beat up, probably from murdering so many people in space. Oblivious as the day was long, Jerry piped up again.
"Please take your dishes to the vacuum dock, thank you."
At this point, half the guys had their head in their hands. They couldn't look. They didn't want to see a good kid get murdered in space by the space murderer. This was the best they could do. Calvin started thumbing his pistol again. He had some brass balls to even think about it with that space murderer in here. For a full minute, nobody moved. Everybody prayed. Prayed for Jerry. He was a good kid. Had a pretty girl back home. I had to say something to ease the tension, but my throat had closed itself until further notice. Nobody wanted to look at the space murderer. Everyone was looking at Jerry.
"Now, fellas, what's with the silent treatment? We're all gentlemen here, and we all do our part. Why, you all told me yourself. Keep it clean, keep it cool, please and thank you, that's the rule."
Oh, Jerry, were you raised under a rock? What's the point of all that in the presence of the space murderer? The space murderer supersedes the courtesy hierarchy, but he didn't know that. Had he even heard of the guy? Oh, Jerry, you poor stupid fool, Jerry. Why'd you have to go and be so smart about pneumatics and phase coils, but so goddamn dumb about space murderers? Oh, Jerry. Then there was a sucking sound and a clonk behind me. I had to physically turn my head with my hands to see the space murderer placing the last of his dishes into the vacuum dock. Nobody but me had the guts to look. Well, me and Jerry.
"Thank you for that. No sense in dirty dishes mucking up the whole station, am I right? Please, thank you."
Jerry cheerily congratulated the man who could murder him 11 ways from Sunday in space. The space murderer then turned and walked with heavy booted steps out of the nearest door. Everyone had been holding their breath. For how long? None of us knew.
"Gee golly, fellas. Venusian bilecats got your tongues?"
"Shut up, Jerry. We could all punch you in the face right now, you madman. You poor stupid madman. You'll have a real story to tell your kids as soon as we know the space murderer's out of earshot." We held off on telling Jerry anything, but our terror had been replaced with a strange suicidal curiosity wrapped in the need for closure on this anecdote. We followed 100 paces behind the space murderer. Didn't want to get murdered after all. He plodded toward the spaceport, and then he ran into Bob, that guy who jettisoned our porno mags. Then he murdered Bob, and he left through the airlock to the landing pad. We all nodded to each other and muttered around. Yeah, figured it would be Bob. He deserved it. The end.
The art, story, and narration was done by me, Jerk Douglas. The music was done by my good friend Pretzel. I'll have a link to his YouTube channel in the description, as well as links to my Tumblr and the location where you can find the original image. Thanks for watching, everyone. Have a nice day!